Pein. He's the author of Live, Work, 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 Die. Corey. And, of course, also the host of the Great News from Nowhere podcast, which people should subscribe to on Patreon if they haven't already. I do that, too. Knowledgeable minds do that.
Thanks for the plugs right off the bat. I'm always happy to come on Majority Report and the Michael Brooks Show. I've yet to be invited on Literary Hangover. I might have been invited to Antifada, but it didn't work out.
You are welcome anytime, Corey. But
good.
We haven't totally figured out our setup for phone interviews yet, so we might have to do some work on that. Or next time you're in New York.
Yeah, I don't know when that will be. I do have some good news about the book. I recently signed. Is this too self-promotional?
No, go for it. You ready? You ready for this? Hold on.
I recently signed what is known.
Go ahead.
That was awesome.
Yes, sir.
I'm pumped now. I
should be pumped.
Elevated my mood. I recently signed what is apparently known as a shopping agreement. So there is hopes to develop Live, Work, Work, Die into some kind of televisual series. So if any of your audience has ideas about people who are directors or producers or other sorts of talent,
I have ideas as to people who could be on both, I guess, acting and writing staff.
Yeah, I think I need to be on the writing staff.
Yeah.
Same. You should call it Silicon Valley.
Part 2.
That's a great idea. I'm sorry, my kitten has a Gatorade bottle that's making a lot of noise.
I was wondering what that was. I was wondering. So, Corey, I'm writing a book now, and I'm not trying to flog it too much, although it is the timeline is starting to accelerate and dilate on that a little bit more. And I don't consider, I can write. I've published in certain places. I'm not a writer the way you are. But I remember talking with you, and without giving away any trade secrets, there was a big process that you had to go through with this book. And of course you had a, good big publisher and everything. And the lawyers take a look at everything before something gets published.
Yes, they do.
They take a good look. And, I'm writing a book that really actually, ironically, and it's funny that I have to say ironically in today's world, but it deals with this. It's not just a critique of the intellectual dark web. It's actually an attempt to understand the moment we're in and why it would facilitate something like the intellectual dark web. And of course, it's going to involve critiques of these people. It's not going to involve any, of course, made up stories or anything. It's going to involve dealing with their ideas. I'm sure, of course, I have no doubt that, Sam Harris will say he was taken out of context, but that seems to be like some type of Gestalt response that he has to just basically anything that's even mildly critical. So he'll do his thing. But there's an interesting trend here with Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson got on the map through sort of basically saying that I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna respond to people's gender pronouns, at least in a compulsory manner, and I'm willing to go to jail over this. He had this whole kind of public melodrama about this Canadian directive that he was responding to, and definitely radically overreacting to. And he also was saying that speech codes of any kind sort of close the infrastructure of free speech. They limit the cognitive and linguistic territory. And what's been interesting in the last couple of months is that Jordan Peterson seems to have no problem limiting certain kinds of cognitive and linguistic territory, and those involve anybody who's critical of him. He called several months ago, he sued a university in Canada, basically professors who had criticized him. He sued them for a conversation that they had in a leaked tape where I mean, the professors did not come off well on the tape at all, but it's a bit of an incredibly astonishing thing to sue over, especially for a self-proclaimed free speech advocate. And now Jordan Peterson has sent a letter to an author by the name of scrolling it down for me.
I've got it here. Yeah. Kate Mann.
Kate Mann.
M-A-N-N-E.
Yes, Kate Mann. Who?
And she's a professor at the Sage School of Philosophy at Cornell. So she's a...
I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity.
So basically, and you might ask yourself, like, did she, as I said, like, did she make up a story about him? Did she say that he killed somebody? Did she do something like that? No, she called him a misogynist in Vox. And
not even
not even that.
I
explain what she did. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually have. So I learned about this story. He filed this, or his lawyer did, back in June, but I just learned about it, I think, with most people this week with the article in The Cut.
Right.
By Aaron Carmen. Right. And they got a hold of the letter that Peterson's lawyers sent. And the first, it's very short, so I'll just read some of it, if you don't mind. I think it's pretty entertaining to get the source material here.
Can you do it in the voice?
It addresses not just... I can't.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Go, no. Do it.
This would be the Peterson's lawyer voice.
All right.
Okay, so it's addressed to Professor Kate Mann at Cornell, to Professor Derek Paraboom, the chair of her department at Cornell.
Wow.
Sean Illing, the Vox reporter who interviewed Kate Mann, and Vox Media.
I know Sean Illing. Sean Illing, good guy, Majority Report listener. Love him.
And it's fun.
Fake news.
And it's which is just, it's okay. First of all, it's just really unusual that I can understand including Vox on there if you're going to be pursuing a libel or slander claim, but adding the chair of her department is just a bullying tactic.
Oh, yeah.
Total scab move.
Yeah, okay. So then it's this letter serves as notice of action, blah, blah, blah. On June 6th, the following libelous statements by Professor Mann were published on the website below. And then it lists some quotes from the professor that upset Jordan Peterson. And they are, I also think the way Peterson cherry-picked a few more dignified-sounding sentences from the diary of one of the Columbine killers, Eric Harris, was downright dishonest. I suspect that for many of Peterson's readers, the sexism on display is one tool among many to make forceful, domineering moves that are typical of misogyny. So she didn't actually call him a misogynist. She just said it was like misogyny.
Lawsuit.
Then,
you're sued.
Then she does go on to frame one of his quotes as classic straight-up misogyny. And then Peterson measures himself by the size of his celebrity, the idea of winning or dominating others.
Sorry.
As an end to itself, eyebrow-raising, authoritarian-sounding. And the last statement they include, it doesn't seem accidental that his skepticism about objective facts arises when it's conveniently anti-feminist. And then there's lawyers from Levitt LLP demand, please...
Jew lawyers, it's IQ science.
Please immediately retract all of Professor Mann's defamatory statements, have them immediately removed from the internet, and issue an apology in the same forum to Mr. Peterson. Otherwise, our client will take all steps necessary to protect his professional reputation, including but not limited to initiating legal proceedings against all of you for damages, including punitive damages.
Oh man, how do we not have the Jerky Boys sound drop for that? Sue everybody.
Oh, and he says...
And the people you associate with, I'll be suing them as well.
Cornell University is vicariously liable for Professor Mann's defamatory statements. Now...
What does that mean?
Well, and then the last words, as the Supreme Court of Canada has made clear, liability can be imputed to employers due to damages caused by their employees and or officers.
Yeah, they're platforming the hussy.
Yeah, they're platforming her.
So... This really just gives a the ghost. I mean,
Right.
the idea that you can stand up as a free speech warrior and then have your personal attorney send around these kind of bullying letters to get articles removed from the internet and replaced with fawning apologies
Right.
is like as far from free speech as you can get. And this stuff does have an effect on media organizations. I mean, in the article that interviewed Sean Illing, basically he says that his employers and their lawyers laughed it off because it was a joke. I mean,
Right.
there's nothing actionable in the U.S. or Canada about what the woman said.
Right. I mean, there's literally nothing. If this was the standard, basically, you couldn't write a critical book review. You couldn't do anything. Yeah, right.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So we're establishing new linguistic territory where you can't criticize my books.
He wants to sue about the stuff that free speech is for.
Yeah, well, I think that's the kind
And
of...
I also suspect that the fact that she's at Cornell and he's stuck up in the frozen north is part of it too, because here's somebody from a arguably more prestigious university who's knocking him, and he's in the philosophy department too, if I recall.
No, he's in
right?
psychology.
I mean,
Psychology.
He's psychology.
Yeah, psychology. But I think your broader point that he's lower than her in the dominance hierarchy and should keep his mouth shut stands.
And a woman at that.
Yeah, but a woman who's at a better college, so it's a tough road.
Who
there.
knows? That's chaos.
That's chaos. Chaos at Cornell, lawsuit edition. No, but I think what you're saying, it's like, yes, it's not just like the obvious giving up of the ghost here in terms of like, this guy and this whole silly movement is constantly banging on about free speech. And now like, this is one of the only maneuvers available where one can really shut down free speech, right? Like this isn't, oh no, I was criticized for saying something that's against my free speech. This is like actually literally you're making an analysis of my work that I don't like. I'll sue you. So I think, that's one part of it. And it does give up the ghost, but it also really shows that like, not only is it giving up the ghost, but I think, and I don't think this is a good thing, because I am probably more on the like, and certainly when it comes to legal and policy decisions, I'm pretty strong on, free speech protections. I don't think that there's an advantage for the left in any type of a long-term way for sort of like speech limitation, right? And I also don't think that speech limitation is necessarily how you win the war against the people that, forward fascistic or any other types of, disgusting ideas, right? But it's just striking now that like, I guess that these people like Jordan Peterson are not only are they giving up the ghost, they've turned the idea of free speech that actually has some, at the very least, agree or disagree, an incredibly important intellectual history and has served a really important role in our society and also in some very left movements, into just like a punch like, oh, that guy's talking about free speech, there's a fascist, right? Like, yeah. They have totally toxified the brand of actually a very admirable.
Well, isn't that what
tradition.
Fascists would want to do? Yes. Free speech. I mean, as an actual concept versus
exactly. Well, there's we've played Richard Spencer, 9 months ago or so, saying like, well, of course we don't actually support free speech, but it's a weapon in our arsenal. And I'm not saying, before people freak out, I don't think Jordan Peterson and Richard Spencer are the same characters, but it's like obviously there's similar water that they're in, intentionally or unintentionally, and this reveals it. You can't, banging on about basically like, I will go to the mat to make sure that I don't respect, identity categories of students, but you can't criticize my book in Vox? What?
There's another similarity that I immediately thought of when I saw this story, because the last Nazi rally that I went to. I might have mentioned it on this. I think I just told friends about this. I don't think I even mentioned it on my show. But there was this guy that was there, young guy, sort of like typical college age, alt-right, Pepe kind of troll. And I'd recognized him from several of these previous rallies. But at this one, he was presenting himself as a sort of young, progressive criminal justice reform advocate and pressing his line on anybody who would listen, including all the national press that was there to cover this thing. And, he came up and talked to me, and I was like, yeah, that's fine. I'll hear you out. I'll hear your spiel as long as I can record it.
Right.
So I was recording him visibly, and at the end of his spiel, his first example for criminal justice reform was the Bundys and how maltreated they were. And I'm like, okay, I see what's happening here.
It's an interesting starting point.
When he at the end of it, he's like, okay, what do you think about what I said? Like, man to man. I was like, man to man? Are you kidding with me? Like, he's like, no, really, man to man. Like, how are you going to spin this? And I'm like, okay, well,
you're gonna go on the Majority Report and make fun of me with Michael? Man to man.
The guy's always laughing in the background.
I said, okay, man.
I find his Nation of Islam Obama a little problematic.
Yeah, super problematic impression. Man to man. Man to
okay, man. I've seen you at these right-wing rallies for more than a year, and I'm really surprised to see you presenting yourself as a young progressive up-and-comer. It's really not what I would have expected. So, I think you're bullshitting me with this whole thing.
Right.
And he's like, immediately goes to, I'll sue you, I'll get you fired. Who do you work for again? I'm totally getting you fired. I've been recording all of this.
Wow.
You're fucked, basically. And
totally fucked.
That is right out of the playbook. I mean, they're picking up this strategy somewhere. I'm not saying that Jordan Peterson is telling all of his weird minions to follow this strategy of suing people who don't portray them as they wish to be portrayed at any given moment. But clearly it's out there,
right?
In their in the waters that they swim in, and it's kind of a tell, right? Like, their idea of free speech is you saying what we want said or else,
right?
Because this example with the kid that I just gave, I mean, I know he was an alt-right activist. I knew his purpose was to, essentially try to recruit people with sort of deceptive tactics into his movement by misrepresenting himself.
Right.
And
right.
his idea of what a good interview would have been, and I don't know if any other reporters who were there bit on this, but I know it happens all the time. These people use fake names and they come up with different PR strategies ahead of their events, hoping to get national press. His idea of a good interview would be, I passed on a pack of lies from him. Right. And that's simply not what free speech was for. Free speech is for so we can have honest discussions, and advance an understanding based on factual information. Right. So the thread that you see with these, Nazis using their legal threats and Jordan Peterson using his to protect his professional reputation, whatever that is that it does go back to this sort of like patriarchal dominant idea of what I say is free speech. What you say is slander, unless you're echoing what I say. And that's simply not free speech. That is totalitarian propaganda.
Right.
Well, I think that speaks to what Mariana said the other day, which is fascists have very slippery tactics and they're very adaptable to whatever is popular at the moment. Like Barry Weiss likes to call herself a liberal, and that's a neat rhetorical trick because also, like, in addition to wanting their ideas spread, they want to be liked and respected. And, you know, it's like the same thing as Peter Thiel, who sued Gawker out of existence because they clowned on him constantly. Granted, they gave him a reason when they outed him, so it would look a little better on his end. But
if the Saudis knew, I wouldn't get money.
Like they don't want to just be able to talk. They want to be in mainstream platforms, and they want to be liked and respected, and they can't handle it when people speak against them.
Yeah. You know, I think actually Nick Denton, the former Gawker owner, is pretty convincing when he talks about how the outing wasn't really an outing. Especially in his peer group, Thiel's peer group, and that the real motivations for the lawsuit probably had more to do with their coverage of the businesses that he funded.
Oh, yeah.
That was negative.
He is a cold-blooded killer. I promise you, he doesn't care at all about, like, you know, socialized homophobia or
And
whatever.
Just in varying context of the conversation, he's figuratively speaking a cold-eyed killer.
As far as we know,
Figurative,
yes.
as far as we know. I mean, there's a lot of legitimate questions to ask there.
Cold blood. I mean, that's also a thing he likes.
Yeah, blood is an interest.
Ice cold refrigerated blood.
Ice cold refrigerated blood.